I'm not trying to kink shame anybody, but I think collectively we can get together and say that bestiality is a no. This video is canceled. Hello, and welcome to another episode of I spend way too much money in half-price books, even though they're not technically an actual local bookstore, but that is what it is. I picked up Girls Who Bite, which I will put on the screen over here somewhere, at Half Price Books a few days ago because it was $4 and I was anxiously waiting on Midnight Sun. It has since arrived, but back at the time when I started this book, it had not, and so I was just tearing through that. For those of you who don't know anything about Girls Who Bite, it is a collection of vampire, lesbian erotica, and if that sounds crazy to you, it is. And so I sat there and read that. I think it took me maybe a day and a half to read it. The stories are truly wild, so I'm dragging everyone along on this experience to really just dive into this insane content. So buckle up, get ready, grab you some popcorn because these stories are wild and we're gonna rank them. So yeah, let's get into it. The tiers that we have here are top tier, please write a book. Absolutely, there were a handful of these where I'm like, this is a great concept, it's executed well, the writing is amazing. Please write a book. Don't just live in the land of erotica out here off at sea. Write a book. The second tier is I'm gonna need a little more, which is, you know, the concept was there, the writing was there. It might have been missing some element of something that, you know, could have beefed it up, but overall it was really good. They tried it. There's a lot of them that really, they did try, you know, did it land? Maybe. Did it not? Probably. The fourth tier is, what is this? Not really sure why this was written, not really sure why with all the concepts that you have in the vampire genre, you decided to write what you wrote, but you did that and that's your right. And the final tier is, I almost threw up. That's pretty self-explanatory. I'm not trying to yuck anybody's yum or kink shame anybody, but some of these I was like, I don't know this man. If you walked past me on the street, I wouldn't know a thing. But let's get into ranking these. All right, so not going in any particular order. Please do not judge me on the pictures. I truly just Googled some stuff that felt like the air of the piece of the fanfic. So, you know, I just grabbed what felt right in the moment. So the first one is Al Dente. This one follows Julia and Astrid, who are two lesbian vampires, and they are hanging out in Italy. They seduce a man back at a Italian nightclub and bring him back to, you know, have a little Italian nightclub after night fun, you know? And the whole story centers around the fact that they've been in this established relationship for however many thousand years, or probably hundreds. That's very dramatic, but they're kind of still navigating like, oh my God, am I enough for her? Like whatever. And then all doing that in the course of, you know, feeding on different people every night. Overall, I thought it was good. I love an established relationship trope. I love that the man was not that involved, which is a trend that you will definitely see, but one that, you know, is not always common in vampire genres. So for Al Dente, I'm absolutely gonna put it right up there with Please Write a Book because the setup was perfect. Julia and Astrid as different characters, amazing. Loved it. All right, so the next one that we have is this picture here with these two Egyptian goddesses. I looked up the name of these two goddesses and truly the writer took some liberties, but I decided that because it was originally some like Egyptian lore, that was the picture that I was gonna pick. And the story was Beloved by Shayla Kirsten. This story, truly, I DNF'd it one time already, but then felt weird about not finishing it and finishing all the others, so I went back and finished it. It was just as cringy as when I stopped it the first time. It follows Sekhmet, I believe is the goddess's name, and then Hathor, and they're linked together for life in this dance. It's sort of enemies to lovers the way that they write it, but I was not a fan of it personally. I usually love that trope, but I wasn't into it. It was bad. There were so many cringy lines, and because this is erotica, when I say cringy, I mean it all the way through. It was something else entirely. So we're gonna drag that one to what the hell is this? Because I didn't almost throw up, but you know, I wanted to a little bit. So moving swiftly on, the next one that we have is Bloody Wicked, which is by Viviana. And this one follows Anissa and Alexa. And this one actually had a pretty interesting storyline. It's about Anissa, who's a witch, and she's like caught up in this murder mystery investigation. And then Alexa's a vampire who's a cop. And they come to interview her at her witch, like, you know, shop where she sells like kind of her potions and stuff. And she's always kind of doing something a little bit spooky, like mixing her like own like sexual energy with like the potions and stuff. And then she has a lot of very bizarre relationships with clients that are really negative. And so they come to question her because someone has died, and they're like, did you do it? And she's
like, how dare you ask me if a man that I hated and was murdered publicly, if I had anything to do with it? And they're just like,
okay. So overall, I thought the story was great. The romance was good. It was really rushed, but they only have like 15 pages in the submission. So, you know, so I'm going to go ahead and put that one up at Please Write a Book, because I don't feel like I've ever seen a vampire witch storyline, love story, especially not with two women. So the next one is Bound Love by Christina Diabo. This one follows Molly and Lana. And they're in like a dom sub relationship, which usually I feel like is a little dicey, because with male and female relationships, you know, I'm just still on like 50 Shades where I don't know how I feel about it. The way that it's portrayed currently in media, I feel like is a little suspicious sometimes, but I feel like when it's written well, it can be done really well. This one was really good, and it's Lana is the human, and she's kind of like Molly, her caretaker. And she gets like very caught up on blood and like the bloodlust aspect of it, and the way that the writer handles it is kind of like an addiction, which I thought was a really interesting like kind of parallel. And so Lana basically helps her through that like bloodlust like addiction. And of course, because it is erotica, there's tons of, you know, erotic undertones like in their like BDSM like kind of dom sub relationship. So it's really good. The picture that I picked for this one was Ruined Jewels, because I don't know, for whatever reason, like the way that they like cared for each other and loved on each other, like it just really reminded me of their relationship, wherein it's like kind of toxic, but it also is genuinely like supportive, and there's tons of aftercare and love and whatever. I thought that it was really good. That one definitely had the best sex scenes of any of them, so hands off to you, Christine. So yeah, we're gonna put that one straight up to Please Write a Book, because I would read it, absolutely, no questions asked. Next one that we have here is The Crystal Altar, and that one is written by Adele Dubois. This story is a disaster, honestly. Like, I picked for this one Daphne and Velma because it was truly serving me absolute 12-year-old Scooby-Doo fanfic, but make it sort of vampy and erotic, which total miss. So that one follows Morgan and Rosa, and they're girlfriends. They've been girlfriends for a while. Rosa is seemingly like not really all the way out yet, so their relationship is a little bit sort of in secret, but not really. Their relationship is just kind of like going through something right now. They're dealing with their relationship drama and whatever, and it's all centering around them going to Morgan's cousin Angela's birthday party. So the sex scene happens at the beginning before they go into the cave, and then from there it just gets even more convoluted. I've never seen a park that had a cave in it randomly, so I don't know where the author is like taking those liberties. And then I was also deeply confused because she's like, oh yeah, my cousin Angela just came back from Eastern Europe. She loves Eastern Europe, and she made a lot of friends in Eastern Europe. She got eye surgery in Eastern Europe, and they kept like dropping this stuff, and it was super heavy-handed. And then Angela comes out and she's like gorgeous and a redhead, which is a trend that you will find in a lot of these stories if you actually decide to pick it up. and she has all of these friends, and they go into a cave, and they're doing like a bizarre tour, but nobody has a flashlight, so it's like pitch black, and then Angela just kind of like lays out, and then suddenly it's like a vampire orgy, and I'm like, why would you invite your cousin to this? Like, it was so confusing. And then she's like, well, luckily I brought you a birthday present. It's a silver necklace, Angela. Zzz. And it's like holding it out. Angela's like, no, my weakness. Oh, I'm a vampire. It was so over the top and so dramatic. And then by the time they got to the end, Morgan and Rose are like, that was a huge test for our relationship. I think we're going to make it. And I'm just like, I think you're going to make me throw up. What's going on? It was bizarre, upsetting, and the writing was bad. No. So that one is going to firmly go into I almost threw up, because why would you invite your cousin to that type of setup? All right, the next one was Dark Angel by Paisley Smith. This one was boring, just boring. They had a lot of random things in it that were confusing and not necessary, but then if you were going to leave them in, they should at least serve the plot. So this one follows Evangelina and Lenore, and Evangelina is kind of in the closet still because she's married. The story also takes place in Berlin in 1934, which was unnecessary, honestly. I don't know why they needed to add that in. I guess to like further villainize her husband, which they really didn't need that aspect, because at the very beginning of the story, he sees her looking at a girl at a bar and brings her out into the alley and is yelling at her about embarrassing her and being a disgrace. And she's like, well, how are you going to say that I'm a disgrace? You're a Nazi. And he literally shoots her in the chest. There was no reason for that additional detail, especially because I know that it was always the plan that he was going to shoot her in the chest. And then he just kind of runs off and was like, look what you made me do. And then, of course, Lenore comes, turns her into a vampire. And then they spend a very short amount of time with Evangelina being like, oh my God, no, I didn't want to be a vampire. And then they're together. You know, very rushed, very insta love, not amazing in the writing or the quality or the pacing or any of that. And then by the end, they decide to team up and kill her husband, which is honestly the most interesting part of the story, and it's exactly where the story ends. So, not amazing. So I'm gonna put that straight into they tried it, because you know what they did? They had all of the bones to get it to the place where I would be really interested, and they fumbled the bag. And that's disappointing. Next one is Dark Guard by Karish Walsh. This one, I picked Rizzoli and Niles for it because that's exactly what I was thinking all while I was reading this story, because it's about one of the girls, Lisa, is like a were animal, because in the lore of this story there are all types of were animals, were lynx, were wolves, were panthers. It's very True Blood and we love to see it. And then the other girl, Rika, is a vampire, and she like works with like the big police, and it's kind of like True Blood in that they come out of the coffin, the vampires and all these other creatures all these other creatures come out of the coffin and start to work together. And, you know, where do the vampires go? To the police station. You know, whatever. But their romance is truly so cute. It's enemies to lovers. Even though it's the same length as all the rest of these, the way that that author used those pages was amazing. The world building was great. The relationship between the two of them was great. And the whole reason why they came together is because they're solving a murder mystery. They're solving a string of murders together, and the satisfaction of this book was incredibly high because the way that the pacing was done, I was nervous. I was right along with them while they're like, you know, griping with each other and not really friends and dealing with like weird prejudice that exists like within this universe of were creatures and vampires. It was very good, very engaging. The sex scene was also very good. And also they got to stop a crime, take down, you know, some corrupt cops together, and we'd love to see that. That's truly the victory that we need. So I'm putting Dark Guard, my two Rizzoli and Niles ladies, right up here to Please Write a Book, because I would love literally to see this pop across my TBR or my anticipated setup. The next one that we have down here is The Gift of Lilith. This one was also really good. Reading the book is kind of tricky because it truly bounces back and forth between ones that are really good and ones that you're like, why was this created? Like, what's happening? The Gift of Lilith is really good. It follows Catherine and Molly. Molly is like a redhead. She's super outgoing, party girl, whatever type. And then Catherine is like bookish and is like a vampire and very like indoorsy, like likes to stay in, like super quiet. And Molly basically comes over to her house one day and is like, come with me to this party, like let's go, let's hang out and whatever. And Catherine's like, no, I'm gonna stay in my pajamas and like read my book. So they don't end up hooking up, and Molly's like, oh, that's fine, like whatever, like I'm gonna go to this party. And then she leaves, and then Catherine's like, that's super weird, she's acting super suspicious. So she goes down to the party. She finds out that Molly is dying, and that's the reason why she's like trying to do all this stuff. And then she's like, you know, do you want to live, obviously? And then she's like, yeah, obviously I want to live. I'm like 20 something. And she's like, well, I can give you this gift. And the gift that she has is the Gift of Lilith. So it's not, that one is not super vampire-y. It's like, she's not a vampire. She just has this gift. And the gift is like immortality. And she can pass it to Catherine. And then once Catherine is like done with her wild years of whatever, she can pass it to the next person. And when you pass the gift on, you don't die, you just become a human again, which was a really cool concept, and I really like that. So please write that book. So we have Impunjolu by Regina Jameson. I don't know what this story was trying to do. It was like trying to give me a little South African flavor. I don't know, but it was really bizarre and one of my least favorite concepts. So it starts with a girl who is gonna ultimately be revealed to be Lilith, and she's driving randomly and something crashes down into the ground, and she goes to check it out, and it's an egg. And then she's like, that's weird, and the egg gets sucked into the ground, and she's like, going home, bye, and like just goes home and is drawing the egg and is like obsessed with the egg, and nobody knows what's going on. I considered leaving this immediately because it was verging over into like some sci-fi bizarre territory, which I don't really want sci-fi and vampire and alien. It's too many things. Like it was a lot happening and I wasn't here for it. Much going on. The representation for South Africa I don't believe was positive. Now, I'm not from South Africa. I don't know South Africa very well, but just the way that it was being portrayed was very suspicious and I didn't love it. You know, if you've read this and felt differently, absolutely comment down below. I thought it was weird and bizarre, so I'm absolutely gonna throw that one straight into what is this, because was deeply confused. The next one that we have is Kaida, and this one, hands down, was the best written of all of these. So it follows a group of sisters who are salt girls in their village, and basically the thing of this story is that the salt girls of this family kind of crave blood more than they crave food. So all of the older sisters have already started drinking blood. That's like the primary thing that they do. And the boundaries that they put on themselves are that they will only drink from like the terrible, awful men in the community, which serves to rid the community of like pedophiles and rapists and people who are just not living right, you know? And so they do that, and in return the community doesn't like really seek any like type of retribution for them and their like murdering that they're doing. But the younger sister, whose name I don't think is ever mentioned, she doesn't want to do that. She doesn't like men, she doesn't like being around them, and especially like the terrible men that they encounter. Like she doesn't want to have any. She spends a lot of the short story trying to figure out how to eat moths, which is such a bizarre concept, but her grandma basically tells her that you can't eat the moths because they could be fallen Aztec warriors who are like a new body basically, or it could be Kaida, which are like angels who have fallen down or have been kicked out of heaven, and they have to basically do a bunch of good deeds and good works before they'll be allowed back into heaven. So she grows up like with that like kind of mythology in the back of her head, and one day she goes into the fields where all the like dangerous stuff kind of happens all the time in their village, and she sees like a moth that's slowly dying, and she's so hungry that she's like, I am eating this moth. But then when it lands on the ground, it turns into a woman. The prose is really, really beautiful, like really insane, especially in comparison with all the rest of these. The writing for Kaida is so, so good. Immediately when I was reading it, I was like, I would read this in a book, like 100% would read this in a book. and the characters super, super fleshed out for just 15 pages. I'm like, how have I read books where I get all the way to the end of like 130-page novella and you have flatter characters than someone who only had 15 pages? Like, what are you doing? But I digress. Very interesting story, very amazing writing. Putting that straight up there with please write that book. As I'm looking at these please write a book, none of them really are touching Kaida, but you know, we're gonna let them live because they've already been put there. All right, so the next one is Night at the Wax Museum, and this one is by Delilah Devlin. Hers is about Krista and Mina, and Krista is a security guard at a wax museum, and she's just noticing like super weird stuff. She gets assigned to like figure out what the rat problem is in the wax museum, and she notices that the vampire in one of the wax exhibits is missing, and so she's like looking for her, and you know, she finds her, of course, and they start pursuing a relationship, and it's actually really cute and really sweet for erotica. I really loved it. Definitely were some parts that I felt like were introduced and not really fleshed out. For example, Krista is a veteran and they never really talk about any of her past. She walks with a cane, I believe, or she has like something going on with her hip that they briefly mention, but they don't really get into it. And I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's a short story and they can't put everything in, but I wanted a little bit more. It definitely is still really high up there for me, but I'm going to put it up there with I'm gonna need a little more, just because it did need a little bit more fleshing out, to be honest. All right, the next one is a story called Madeline. So Madeline follows the main character, Madeline, and then Lil, who they both meet at church when they're like 12 years old, super small town. It's very cute. They're like friends when they're little kids, and then when they become teenagers they start to date, but then they go into the city and are like attacked by a man who's like a vampire, and it seemingly creates two different like paths that they decide to go down. So Lil like hates men, doesn't want to be involved with them after their attack, and then Madeline decides to get into sex work, and you know, they argue about it constantly, and then they end up like breaking off and not seeing each other for 20 years, and then they come back together at like a greasy little diner to like talk everything out. And Lil finds out that Madeline doesn't necessarily like really like men. She just like gets them like pulled in with like the sex work and then like robs and murders them. So she's like, oh my god, that's so crazy. Here's me just thinking that you love men. Like, that's wild. What a crazy miscommunication, which was really annoying when I was first reading it, but I got over it. And then they have a scene in this short story that truly is amazing. It's serving me heavy Silver Linings Playbook. It was giving me that type of energy where Madeline is just yelling at Lil and like acting a fool, and then the miscommunication is revealed, and then they're like, oh. And then Madeline literally just jumps across the table and they start making out, and there's like one other person in the diner, and then this poor waitress Wendy, who truly deserved better, and she's
like, hey, like getting her little spray bottle. She's like, no, you can't do this in here.
Poor girl. It was a great story, loved it. I absolutely needed more, so that's exactly where it's going. The next one that we have is Red Horizons by Victoria Oldham, and this story on paper should not work. It's like a vampire, lesbian, pirate erotica, which is just too many things. It's too many steps. There's too much happening there. But it follows Jane and Eleni, and Eleni is a Greek vampire, and then Jane is a human, and they both are kind of into each other, but they don't know that they're both into each other. So Jane is super frustrated, so she leaves the ship on one of the nights that they dock in Spain, and she's like, I'm going to a lesbian bar and I'm gonna meet somebody so I don't keep thinking about Eleni. And she goes, she meets this woman, they don't hit it off, and she's like, well, that was lame. And then she meets another vampire who's like, I want you to like come and join me for whatever. And she's like, no, like I'm not doing that. I'm going back to my ship. I'm already like shacked up with like 9 vampires. I'm not about to add like a 10th. Like, this is too much. Like, I'm not getting anything out of this ordeal anymore. And it turns into an insane situation where it's Jane and Eleni and the other vampire whose name I've already forgotten. It's definitely bizarre, but it's good. Like, it works. somehow. The writing was okay. I definitely I needed a little bit more. So the last two that we have here are some favorites. One of them is my most favorite, and the other one is the reason that I created the almost threw up category. So the one that we're going to talk about first is the pet door. The pet door, I didn't even write the artist's name down or the author's name down because nobody needs to go and look for this. Nobody needs to go and read this. This follows a relationship between two characters that I apparently didn't even write their names down because I really didn't want y'all to find this, clearly. But it follows two characters. One of them is a human, one of them is a vampire. But in this like world of lore or whatever, the vampire is able to shift and manipulate forms. And so their relationship starts off with her as a wolf or wild dog just coming in through the dog door at this woman's house and just being pathetic and like being like whimpering at her feet and like asking for water and just generally being scruffy. And the woman is like grossed out by the dog and is like, poor, sad, gross thing. Like, what is this? And then one day she comes through the door and instead of just remaining a dog, she becomes a woman and they hook up. It's bizarre. It's gross. There's like a lot of dom sub relationship. Because the writing is not amazing, I was unclear during so much of it whether the main character was a dog or a woman when she's sleeping with this one. It was disgusting. I'm not trying to kink shame anybody, but I think collectively we can get together and say that bestiality is a no. So for me, the pet door is gonna go straight into I almost threw up because after reading it, I wish that I had stopped and DNF'd it completely because it was gross, it was confusing, the writing was bad, and I didn't understand why it was put in the collection. They could have added another story about a witch and a vampire, or they could have added another story where a person of color is a vampire. They literally could have added anything that was not this because I don't understand what is sexy about someone who is a dog trying to seduce someone who is a woman. It was creepy. I'm not into it. No, it was a no for me. It was a no for me. And then the last one is She Knows I'm Watching by Rebecca Buck. This one was so good. And it follows a vampire who has like kind of a love interest, but they've never really met in any real way. They just kind of like are always like just missing each other. And the writing is really beautiful and really poetic. And I love the concepts that it introduced. It talks a lot about like the transient nature of like human life. And then juxtaposing that with vampire life, which is very long and very extended and lends itself to a lot of like self-reflection and self-contemplation. And it was just a really good concept. I would love to see it. So I'm shooting that one straight up to please write a book. So overall, looking at this like lineup, you can kind of get the feel that most of the stories are pretty good. Some of them are okay, and a fair amount of them real suspect and real questionable. But of course, it's all going to depend on what you like, on what your erotica setup is. I'm really hoping there's not a lot of you who are like the pet door. That's my thing. But you know, I'm not trying to yuck anybody's yum. It definitely is a yuck for me, but to each his own. So yeah, that is that. That is a full review of Girls Who Bite. I can't wait to start reading Midnight Sun. Thanks to Lindsay for, you know, really feeding this interest here, because I wasn't going to make a video, wasn't going to talk about it, just going to read it and wait for my book. But, you know, I got to give the people what they want. I unfortunately can't give anyone the book because I've already swapped it for 7 other books that I'm very excited to read. But should it find its way back to my house, I will be sure to, you know, send that off because I think everybody needs to be involved in this experience. So if you like this video, be sure to leave me a comment down below. Tell me what you think. If you have read this book, I deeply want to hear from you in the comments because, whew, a trip, honestly. So yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for sticking around if you did. Even if you clicked out, thank you so much. The view count. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. Hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye!